This edition of Monocle on Saturday was first broadcast on the 23rd of November 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello, I'm Georgina Godwin, broadcasting to you live from Midori House in London. This is Monocle on Saturday. Coming up on today's programme, we look through the week's news and culture with journalist and Monocle Radio regular Vincent McAviney. Then,
I think that's one of the things that inspired us actually, was this idea of like an evolved object. So rather than a named designer, they're products that have kind of been made in the same way for generations, and that's shaped the product or the objects themselves.
Arts and culture specialist and documentary maker Issabella Orlando speaks to two artisan retailers about how their attention to craftsmanship affects consumption. That's all ahead here on Monocle on Saturday with me, Georgina Godwin. First though, here's the news. A powerful Israeli airstrike targeted central Beirut today, security sources said, shaking the Lebanese capital as Israel pressed its offensive against the Iran-backed Hezbollah group. Lebanon's national news agency said early this morning that the attack resulted in a large number of fatalities and injuries and destroyed an 8-storey building. US President-elect Donald Trump said he will nominate prominent investor Scott Bessent as US Treasury Secretary. The choice of Bessent, 62, who's spent his career in finance, gives Wall Street an advocate for tax reform and deregulation. And some strategists said his nomination was a relief, as he understands markets and his appointment could reduce the chance of severe tariffs. And the Italian artist Maurizio Catalan, who created the banana duct taped to a wall that sold this week for $6.2 million, said in an interview that the work was a provocation and an invitation to appreciate the true value of art. It's the market that's decided to take a banana stuck on the wall so seriously. If the system is so frail to slip on a banana skin, maybe it was already slippery, Catalan said. And that's your Monocle Radio News. Hello, this is Monocle on Saturday. I'm Georgina Godwin, and joining me in the studio is the journalist, Monocle regular commentator and good friend, Vincent McAviney. Good morning to you, Vinny.
Good morning.
It is blowing a gale out there.
Storm Bert is hitting the UK and Ireland. There are severe weather warnings around the country, and it's definitely here in the Baker Street area of London starting to get a bit breezy out there.
It's so cold and miserable, isn't it?
It definitely feels very wintry.
I admire our colleagues in the coffee truck, because we've got a little temporary coffee truck outside. And actually, it's wonderful because people are coming into our premises, which they never normally do.
No, it's lovely.
And getting their coffee, but it must be freezing out there.
Yeah, and it's really nice. Every time I've sort of been out there in recent weeks, and you sort of come out the building, people sort of start talking to you like, oh, what do you do here? What's this? And they're asking questions about it and things. So it's been a really nice experience. The shop, I think, is reopening next month. But it's definitely been nice. But I hope they're sort of they've got the sort of foundations on the truck today, that they've taped everything down and that it's all tied down for the wind.
Absolutely. Well, that brings us neatly to COP, because the talks there have gone over time, and of course climate change is just so responsible for the violent weather we've been having all over the world. The talks went overnight. They were desperately trying to come up with some kind of a figure, really, is what they're really after. The Guardian has a big piece about this.
Yeah, they're running an excellent live blog today in these final, what should have been done and dusted. They should have all been packing up and heading home around now. They were expecting a few hours ago the sort of latest version of the sort of cable agreement to come out. There's still a lot of haggling going on, as we understand it at the moment. As you say, developing nations are demanding more money. They're wanting about $1 trillion worth to help them ease off of fossil fuels and to help combat climate change. The sort of wealthier nations are offering offering sort of about $250 billion. So it's a battle of billions versus trillions. And then at the same time, you've got apparently another flank of nations, the petro-states. Of course, Azerbaijan, the host, heavily criticised at times for the fact it was caught out before the conference trying to do deals for its state oil company. We heard their president say, oil is a gift, oil and gas is a gift from the gods. And we understand Saudi Arabia is leading a charge to try and reverse the gains that were made last year and surprising gain at the UAE conference, where there was sort of the inclusion of talk about moving away from fossil fuels. Apparently Saudi Arabia is trying to get that struck out. So, of course, the thing hanging over all of this, as we keep sadly having to say on sort of every story we're covering at the moment, the G20 or the, whatever it was, the APEC last week, all of this is sort of shadowed by Donald Trump looming over it because he pulled out of the Paris Agreement. It doesn't feel like his views on climate have changed or developed much in recent years, and the sort of picking of those around him sounds like they are skeptics and deniers as well. So then sort of you have these sort of smaller COPs and then the big one, the big next one, I think, is the Brazilian one during Trump's presidency. And that's where you really do want to get big action to stop, this critical sort of 1.5 degree rise. And it feels like everyone is thinking, well, let's just sort of run down the clock on this year's one. Let's not agree much because the game is all about to change once again anyway.
Yeah, but although, I mean, a lot of people are saying it's vitally important to get this signed off and irreversible before Trump gets in.
Yeah, potentially, but as we were saying, that it's obviously a bit windy here in the UK. It is, of course, winter here now. But this COP started with the most sort of awful symbol of what climate change means. Those floods in Spain, which killed hundreds of people, came so rapidly. If things like that aren't really going to focus minds, and we've seen other examples over the past year of sort of extreme climate events, if it's not going to focus minds, it sort of feels quite desperate that nothing really will. And a big part of it is, these sort of petro-states and Russia as well are spreading still huge amounts of disinformation about the reality of climate change. And we had a really good example last week here in the UK, actually. The boss of an energy company, Octopus, which has been a sort of startup energy company that's done really well. And their boss went on to a BBC programme called Question Time, and there was a Tim Stanley, who's a Telegraph comments writer, who sort of glibly was talking about how, the new tech doesn't work because it's not windy or it's not sunny, and China's still building, coal plants and things like that. And this Octopus boss sort of took him entirely to task, and he says it's always sunny somewhere and it's always windy somewhere on this island, and it's about the battery storage. And he brought up the fact that, electric car batteries store, he said, enough energy for a home to be run for, a week, basically, the average home. And it's all about the storage and switching with European neighbours and funding. And he also said, and don't think that China is not, they've accepted climate change at the highest levels. They are breezing ahead and trying to lead the world when it comes to this kind of tech. So, and what's really interesting with that is I heard a discussion this week about how companies have been so shy to engage in politics, and the advice has always been don't go into this. They vacated the public square, and what you're seeing in energy is this kind of good intervention. And if you leave the public square and don't kind of fight for your angle if it's new renewables and shifting from fossil fuels, you get the situation in the US that the health companies and the vaccine makers are about to hit with RFK Jr. potentially, where they've pulled back so much from talking directly to consumers. They've allowed the misinformation to spread so far. And I think that's something that they kind of need to address in the build-up to the next COP, is trying to get on top of the disinformation.
And meanwhile, of course, they are fighting about money. There are big figures being thrown around. Still no complete...
and very hard for, wealthy nations to stomach those. Even before the pandemic, these were huge amounts of money for a government to have to justify to its population. Now with, again, we've got a bit of rising inflation here in the UK. Cost of living crisis has not gone away for a sort of British government to say we're putting up this amount of money when, the UK, for instance, has the worst housing stock in terms of insulation and energy efficiency in Europe. There's huge amounts that need to be done here on this. And it's hard to justify to a population money that is sort of disappearing without seeing sort of clear results for it.
Yeah, and as you say, of course, Trump is the huge variable. We don't know. But what he has done, finally, is picked somebody to be his Treasury Secretary. Now, this is the billionaire Scott Bessent. And it seems that Wall Street has been slightly mollified by this.
Yeah, it does. I mean, it's a rare pick for Donald Trump. He doesn't appear to have been on reality TV or be a Fox News anchor at all.
Or a paedophile.
Allegedly. So he once worked with George Soros, which is quite interesting because the sort of Trump camp, he's the sort of like bogeyman of that. And obviously it's slightly laced with some anti-Semitism as well, I'd say, on the MAGA side at times and that sort of alt-right scene. He was an early backer of Trump. And we're seeing once again, of course, Trump. There's no questions of anyone's loyalty. The people that we saw in his first term were people who, weren't the true believers, who didn't sort of stand by him, who sort of were picked by the sort of more sort of moderate staff of Republicans who thought, well, let's put country, first and we'll work with him. And this is now, it is all about loyalty test. It's about whether or not you are out and on air and vociferous for Donald Trump over many years. And it's another person like that seems to be being rewarded.
He was a strong advocate of the America First agenda, so very, very much a loyalist. It does seem to be a sensible pick.
In some ways, but he does want to extend the Trump tax cut that put trillions of dollars onto US national debt. So that is something, and the national debt under Donald Trump rose hugely. I think in the end, it was potentially the sort of largest rise in national debt in one term of presidency. And that was largely due to that massive tax cut for the super wealthy.
He would be, if he's confirmed, the first out gay Treasury Secretary, as well as the first LGBTQ Senate confirmed cabinet member in this Republican administration.
In Republican, I think Pete Buttigieg, who is the transport secretary under Joe Biden, has been the first out cabinet member ever. But he would be the first on the Republican side.
Very, very interesting pick, and it's going to be fascinating to see what effect that has on the markets. Meanwhile, Europe is preparing for Trump tariffs.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, in some ways, there are opportunities from the Trump presidency. And part of this, we've talked about it a lot on Monocle Radio, about the fact that perhaps Europe didn't take its security infrastructure and defense infrastructure seriously for a long time, that it's, after sort of decades of relative peace on the continent compared to previous centuries and the binding together effect of the European Union, that perhaps countries had got too lazy and they weren't meeting their NATO commitment. Now pretty much all European nations are meeting their at least 2% GDP defence spend for NATO commitment, and some exceeding it now. But when it comes to the economy as well, waking up to the fact that Europe needs to be more proactive in investment, but it also needs to perhaps not regulate as much. There's a sort of a great adage that I think it's America invents, China replicates and Europe regulates, and shifting away from that. So it's talking about meetings that European business leaders have been having over recent months, and a conference in Paris this week, where they were talking about what the sort of big nations, France, Germany, Italy, needs to do, and sort of seeing it as a bit of a wake-up call. And it means, do they sort of, do they become warmer in their relationship to China if suddenly they're facing tariffs? You've got the likes of Georgia Meloni, who had some trouble this week. We were discussing it on the briefing, I think on Tuesday. Had some trouble in local elections. She started to lose to the left in parts of the country this week. But looming over her is the fact that her economy is the second biggest manufacturer in Europe after Germany. She has a very good, it seems, relationship with Donald Trump. She has a close relationship, it seems, too, with Elon Musk. But those tariffs could really mess with her government, really do her damage. So it's whether or not the kind of, we all know that Trump is transactional. It's whether or not Europe puts to the fore the leaders, the sort of the Georgia Melonis, the Viktor Orbáns, whether they slightly become the face of the EU to Donald Trump to try and get him to sort of carve out exceptions for the EU when it comes to these tariffs. We know that Britain is trying desperately as well to avoid any kind of Trump tariffs, talking about sort of opening up a new sort of free trade agreement with them. The signals are from the US it would be the exact same as the one that was sort of offered in 2020 2017, which would completely change market standards here in the UK, would decimate farmers because of what it would allow in terms of meat produce and things like that. So it is a sort of battening down the hatches moment for Europe, but this piece is good at talking about the opportunities and perhaps a wake-up call for Europe that it can't stop being complacent.
Yeah, absolutely. They say there is an upside for Europe from Trump's resurgence in that his presidency could push the European Union to strengthen its competitiveness by creating a single market for capital. Now, that's a shift members have never managed to agree on.
Yeah, that would be a huge change. And that's, we used to talk about in this country sort of laughingly about sort of Brexit dividends, and we always were asking, that was what the signposting was going into Brexit. There'd be all these dividends for people, and then the year afterwards it would be, to the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and others, well, where are these dividends? Point to us, tell us what they are. But there are some dividends, it seems, from a second Trump presidency that not only, and we saw from the first, that Europe has taken its security more seriously, perhaps not seriously enough, but again, the Ukraine war has sharpened that definitely. Look at what's happened to Germany when it comes to defence spending. But in terms of the economy, still being too sluggish, still being sort of too over-regulated, maybe they'll think we need to get more competitive, we need to get sharper in the next 4 years.
Well, Trump himself is about to be regulated because his new health secretary, that's RFK Jr, and his wife have decided that what he eats is very definitely unhealthy and his diet is having an overhaul.
Yes, that is right. Now, there was this remarkable picture last week, which it felt like they were trolling RFK Jr, of course, who is very anti-food additives. And this is what's really interesting with the RFK Jr, when we've all been sort of distracted by Matt Gaetz and his aborted run to be Attorney General and how remarkable that seems, someone being investigated for, serious crime, sex trafficking, allegedly, all those things. And sort of we've ignored the serious issues with some of the other cabinet members, Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary. But when it comes to RFK, what's really interesting is some of the analysis is that he's sort of become a figure in the wellness space and a lot of what he says about US food. And if you do look down sometimes, products that we have here in Europe and in other nations, and then you compare the ingredients from recipe versus allegedly the same products in the US, and there are all kinds of things that you don't get elsewhere. And they do have a lot of problems in their food system with preservatives and the like. And so some of what he's saying on that is sort of very welcome. And for a Republican to be saying, we're going to get to grips on the food and things like that. But they obviously trolled him last week when they went to the UFC fight because they were on Trump's airplane. It was Elon Musk was there as well. And they were making him eat, it seemed, McDonald's, which is something Donald Trump would regularly bring to the White House. I also thought that plane must have stunk because, if you're in an office and sometimes someone will deliver a McDonald's or something like that. This happens in newsrooms, really unhealthy late shifts. And the whole route, you realise how smelly the food is. That plane must have been horrific. But Donald Trump, big fan of the Big Mac, but it seems like they're sort of getting aware that, his age, reaching, he'll be the oldest president, I think, ever elected. He sort of beats Joe Biden because he's approaching 80. The fact that this stuff is probably not good at him. So RFK Jr. looking to shift his diet, and so is Melania, who, as we understand it, won't actually be moving to the White House. I think she's just going to be like, work from home Melania now. She's going to be in Mar-a-Lago in New York, maybe pop into the White House to do awful Christmas decorations once a year, if you remember those. But, don't forget this, if Donald Trump was once the man that had a button installed on the Resolute desk in the Oval Office that was just purely for Diet Cokes. Which, allegedly problems with the aspartame in those have faced all kinds of accusations over the years. So we'll see whether or not they can reduce his cholesterol when he returns to the White House or not.
I loved his doctor saying if he would only eat healthily, he could live to 200.
Well, I think his mother did live to a sort of fair old age. It does seem like the Trump family does, and he's teetotal. Which is quite a fascinating aspect of his character because his brother died, I think, of alcoholism and addiction issues, and he's always been teetotal. So that's something that's sort of in his favour, I suppose. But yeah, I mean, if you're the Republican Party, I guess you're hoping that one more term you might be able to sort of shift the party back to the centre. But say if he's only about 84, then there's another, maybe if he lives to a century, that's 16 years more where he's sort of influencing the party and sort of more moulding it beyond all recognition for the sort of, the sort of Cheney wing of the Republicans, the Bush wing of the Republicans. It will be a bit, we shall see whether or not he can kick the McDonald's habit.
Yeah, absolutely, because of course it is all about fast consumption, and in a world driven by fast consumption and mass production, as hamburgers are, craftsmanship sometimes takes a back seat in the creation of everyday items. Yet it does offer a compelling alternative, beautifully made, durable objects designed to last. Through conversations with two Oxford-based artisan retailers, arts and culture specialist Issabella Orlando explores how crafted goods, from homewares to clothing, can inspire us to consume less, value more, and forge lasting connections with the things that we own.
Craftsmanship might be more relevant today than ever. It's an approach that makes careful use of raw materials and skilled traditions to make everyday items more functional, beautiful, meaningful, and lasting. So what role might craft have to play in reframing our relationship with material goods and how we consume them? I spoke to two Oxford-based craft retailers to get their perspectives on the relationship between craftsmanship, sustainability, and consumption.
Before we set up, I was always looking for a certain kind of product, and it was hard to find, which is essentially sort of simple, real products that have integrity to them, and they're just a sort of basic in a way.
So you stock crafted home goods. You've got everything in here from French metal pots and pans to hand-dipped candles from Cumbria. How did you select your suppliers, and what's their connection to sustainability like?
We have sort of well over 100 suppliers, and they're based in, all over the world, really. We always try to focus on businesses that are fair trade, or we've got pans that are made by the only CO2 positive company in the world. But I actually think that because of the nature of the things that we're looking for, the sort of materiality of them, the way they're made, that kind of thing, I think they're naturally actually quite planet positive, I would say. That tends to be what happens. They're natural partners, I think.
So if craftsmanship and sustainability are inherently compatible, how can crafted goods disrupt some of the cycles of overconsumption that many consumers find themselves in?
So sustainability is about kind of the practice of making things last for longer, yeah? So it's not a short-term idea, it's a long-term idea. So the idea is that we can make things in a way that doesn't take more from the planet as time goes along. Then I suppose the role that craft has in that is that because it generally tends to be sort of low impact, local materials, and it doesn't tend to travel as far, it kind of answers that problem in some respect. But obviously it's at a much smaller scale than the way that we're consuming now. There's a problem in a sense, like we're just consuming at a really fast rate. That seems to be the sort of prevailing pattern. And I think compared to what my grandparents used to do, even, which isn't that long ago, we're sort of renewing and replacing products all the time. So I guess the benefit of like really well-crafted objects is that they will last longer, we don't need to keep replacing them, and therefore we don't need to keep on taking the materials at such a fast rate.
In practical terms, crafted goods are made better, which makes them last longer, and therefore we can use less and waste less over time. What about the role of quality? How do you think the long histories of making traditions play into crafted products being more considered, durable, and functional?
I think that's one of the things that inspired us, actually, was this idea of like an evolved object. So rather than a named designer or that kind of thing, they're products that have kind of been made in the same way for generations, and there might be tweaks here and there by different people. So they've kind of gone through the hands of lots of people, and that's shaped the products or the objects themselves. I imagine that's the way to get a perfect object, like it goes through many decades and the edges get chipped off and you end up with something really simple that works really well.
So if crafted goods are designed better and last longer, that means we get to enjoy them more and build relationships with them over their lifespans, whether that's the home goods we use in our kitchen or the clothes we wear. On that note, I went down the road from Objects of Use to ask another craft retailer about crafted clothing and sustainable consumption in that space.
My name's Matt Evans. I'm the co-owner of Goodies in Oxford, a beautiful, curated menswear store We want to provide the spine of a wardrobe. We want to do the basics well. We want people to buy less clothing but better clothing. Everything we stock has a story. Majority is made in the UK, Italy and Japan. We enjoy things of quality and ultimately been kind of crafted, with love and an attention to detail.
So what role does the longevity of a crafted garment have to play in a wearer's relationship with it?
We're looking at pieces that are gonna last you and see you through many years. And normally we talk about it a lot in the store, but the pieces that we sell get better with age. They get broken in, not worn out, and that's why we're always chasing. Generally, I think people always love that broken in pair of jeans over a fresh pair. Those indexable traces of wear can really show how a person has loved and enjoyed that piece of clothing.
It sounds like what you do is really about allowing people to build a relationship with their possessions. How does that result in us ascribing a higher value to crafted products and ultimately practicing more sustainable consumer behavior?
We want people to really love what they buy, because what we do, has different price points, but ultimately it's up there. And if you're going to be spending that kind of money, we want people to absolutely love what they're wearing. And through that, we'll have positive association with it and will be more sustainable in their use of the garment, because I think that comes into the way we think about it. Sustainability also comes from the customer and how it's going to be used and enjoyed, rather than purely on the maker and manufacturer to kind of dictate how things are put together. Clothing is to be worn and enjoyed, and we can get to that repairing and whatever afterwards, but fundamentally sustainability starts with the use of clothes again and again and again.
What's amazing about craft is that this approach can stretch across the board and apply to all the different material objects in our lives. Once we make the investment in a crafted product, it's likely with us for a long time, if not for life, and its value appreciates, which means we use less, the quality of our lives improve, and we enjoy our possessions more over time. This is Issabella Orlando for Monocle Radio.
Well, thanks to Issabella, and it's really interesting considering sort of what art endures. I mean, for instance, you were just talking about this fabulous exhibition you've just been to.
Yeah, my recommendation for sort of a wet and windy day, if you happen to be in London today, is the Van Gogh Poets and Lovers exhibit at the National Gallery. It's the biggest collection, reunification of Van Gogh's work, I think, that's ever been staged, with loans from museums and collections around the world. And it's really fascinating and to sort of see the sort of way that they've arranged it, pictures that he had intended to be sort of hung together, which, normally live in very far-flung corners of the world. It's a really lovely way to spend a sort of wet day, just taking in all those sort of bright, sunny sunflowers and scenic landscapes, but also the sort of darker side, the paintings that you can tell when he was going through his biggest struggles that we painted in hospital and things like that. It's a fantastic exhibit to go and check out today.
Well, one piece of art which won't be seen in public again for a while because it's been bought for over $6 million is a piece that's called Comedian, and it is essentially a banana duct taped to the wall, as we've been talking about in our headlines. And the Maurizio Catalan is the man behind it, and he's talking about just, it's all about, is the art world overrated?
Yeah, I mean, talk about meta. It's one of those stories that I've sort of seen rumbling around all week, and assumed that, the banana had been like put in formaldehyde or something, or preserved in some way. But no, as you've been saying, you have to buy a new banana. You don't even sort of get a sort of, a banana that's going to last, and as seems maybe even a new bit of duct tape each time. So I'm not quite clear what you're actually buying here, but it seems, as you pointed out, it's the instructions for how it should actually be hung, which, I mean, there's only so many ways to hang a banana with a bit of duct tape, isn't there?
And of course, it's all about perception.
But it is about perception. I mean, I know if this was coming up and a Van Gogh was coming up, I know which one I would be spending millions of dollars on. But it sort of feels like the sort of you remember a few years ago there was all the buzz about NFTs, these sort of digital photo cards that weren't sort of real, and it is sort of like a physical embodiment of that, it feels like.
Well, when we talk about perception, of course, that plays a huge part in advertising and branding and all the rest of it. And one brand that's come under such a lot of, well, they're calling it a blaze of intolerance, is Jaguar, because they've just rebranded and it seems like people really don't like it.
Yeah, a huge rebrand. And what's interesting, I was watching it sort of roll out. They were sort of drip feeding it across the week, but they seem to have stopped a couple of days ago. So I think, if you were going to tell an AI to like make a quote unquote woke looking campaign, Jaguar is a sort of heritage British sort of sports car brand. That's its model. But what they seem to be doing is they've done a sort of what they're dubbing a bold rebrand. The website at the moment and all the advertising doesn't even show you a picture of the car. There's sort of a new logo in a kind of maybe what looked like a modern font in the late 90s. They've got a new badge, which rather than the actual Jaguar itself, it's sort of a J with an upside down J the other way. And you sort of got this video of people on what looks like a pink Martian landscape in very sort of strange, unusual clothing, sort of just kind of dancing around, painting with a paintbrush. But on the actual Twitter feed and on their social media, on Instagram and everything like that, you're sort of seeing sort of close-up pictures of the sort of the back of the car and the sort of side angle of the car. It looks very different in terms of their styling, and they're obviously getting a lot of publicity for it. It does sort of look like they're sort of moving to sort of a very futuristic, cubist, sort of even sort of Tesla-like new styling of their vehicles. But if you look at the commentary underneath the campaign, it is generating a huge amount of backlash from people who think that they're trying to pitch to a much younger audience when a rising number of millennials and Gen Z don't actually drive, have by no means the money to afford a car, let alone a Jaguar. So you sort of wonder, are they alienating their core market with this? And it seems like the sort of maybe the worst possible time ever for this kind of rollout, given the sort of results and sort of mood change in the sort of recent election to sort of this kind of messaging.
Yeah, absolutely. It is extraordinary, though, why this has provoked such emotion. Why do people care so much?
Well, I think, any sort of legacy brand that does this kind of change, and we've seen a bit of I think the closest one I can think about it is particularly British brands. You're sort of trying to trade on heritage, and Burberry a couple of years ago did a sort of, they changed their logo and it was decried as being quite ugly. They ditched the sort of classic Burberry patterning and they brought in a sort of interloop T&B, and their sales sort of plummeted, and they're sort of trying to build it back and transition back to what they were. So this kind of change with a company is always can kind of alienate customers. What's interesting is the only other, so they've given you a shot of the rear of the car and then a shot of a panel on the side which has got the sort of small classic leaping Jaguar, and their sort of slogan is "Leap forward, copy nothing." But their social media accounts are really interacting with people underneath, because they're saying, "Wait, we thought you've taken the cat off the logo, you've killed the cat," and they're sort of having to reply and say, "No, it's here to stay. We never get rid of it." But it's definitely going to be interesting to watch, because they seem to be rolling it out, the little bits trickling each day, but then they have stopped quite abruptly, sort of 3 days ago, it looks, on this rollout, and they're maybe trying to wonder if this is the right direction to take it. But they will have spent millions and millions of pounds on this new strategy, and a complete logo, badge rebrand, style rebrand of the cars. It looks like they've already sunk a lot of cost into it.
Absolutely fascinating. Vinny, I assume you're not roaring off from here in a Jaguar.
No, I will be roaring off on the Metropolitan line, I think.
Well, thank you very much for coming, however you leave. That's all for Monocle on Saturday. Thanks very much to Vinny, that's Vincent McAviney, and to our producer and studio engineer, Mariella Bevan. I'm Georgina Godwin. Thanks for listening. And, of course, Monocle on Saturday will return at the same time next weekend.